Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Insights from Women Leaders event. My name is Rula Kakin. I'm the CEO of Salus Vitae Group, and I'll be the host for the event. The Insights from Women Leaders series will include sessions highlighting the journeys and contributions of various women leaders in healthcare. These industry leaders will share their insights on a range of topics impacting healthcare, our communities, and their role in shaping the future. We have a diverse and global audience today at different stages of their careers. Over the course of an hour, I'll be asking our guests a number of questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience questions. So please submit any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. Now it's time to introduce our distinguished guest. October is actually American Pharmacists Month, and we're honored to have a pioneer pharmacy leader. I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Dr. Lucinda Maine. Dr. Maine serves as Executive Vice President and CEO of the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. As the leading advocate for high-quality pharmacy education, AACP works to develop strong academic scholars and leaders to support excellent professional doctoral and postgraduate degree programs, and to build relations with key groups both inside and external to the profession of pharmacy. Prior to assuming her current role in July 2002, Dr. Maine served as a Senior Vice President for Policy, Planning, and Communications with the American Pharmacists Association. Dr. Maine is a pharmacy graduate of Auburn University and received her doctorate at the University of Minnesota. She served on the faculty at the University of Minnesota, where she practiced in the field of geriatrics, and was an Associate Dean at the Stanford University School of Pharmacy. Dr. Maine has been active in leadership roles in and out of the profession. Prior to joining the APHA staff, she served as a speaker of the APHA House of Delegates and an APHA trustee. She currently serves on the board of directors for Research America and is an executive committee member of the American Foundation for Pharmaceutical Education. She's been honored with several prestigious awards, including the University of Minnesota Outstanding Alumnus Award and the Linwood Tice Friend of APHA ASP Award, and the Gloria Neimer Frank Leadership Mentor Award from the American Pharmacists Association. In 2017, she was installed in the Alabama Pharmacy Hall of Fame. And in March 2019, Dr. Maine received the Remington Honor Medal, the profession's highest honor presented annually by APHA. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you so much. And I can't tell you how thrilled and honored I am to be the inaugural interviewee for this important series.
Okay, so let's start with the list of questions for this. So the first one is going to be, did you expect to be where you are today?
So the simple answer is no. I walked out of my first grade class, said goodbye to Miss O'Brien, my first grade teacher, and said, I'm going to be just like you when I grow up. And then life happens, right? I didn't actually think about pharmacy until I was heading off to freshman orientation. And my stepdad, who was not in healthcare, said, have you ever thought about pharmacy? I love science. I love biological sciences, especially. And he encouraged me to go talk to our pharmacist, who was this wonderful early to mid-career pharmacist working in a community pharmacy at the west end of Mobile, Alabama. He was so enthusiastic about the profession and his ability to take care of the patients that he served. And at that point, I never looked back. Enjoyed my education at Auburn immensely in the 70s, graduated 40 years ago today. And you know, my career has just honestly evolved. Did I have on my list to be the CEO of some enterprise? Clearly not. And I'll have to be honest and tell you that even when the position became available and my colleagues in academic pharmacy said, you know, Lucinda, you would be perfect for this position, I had my doubts. And I like to tell the story that I was going to the finalist interview. And I was on the plane and I said, what are they going to be asking me? I said, they're going to ask me how my previous experience prepares me for this position. So I took out a piece of paper and I said, September 1974, entered Auburn pre-pharmacy. And I went all the way down the page, you know, with my education, my internships, my involvement in state national pharmacy associations. When I got down to the end, I'd been at APHA for 10 years at that point in time. I looked at it and I said, wow, half my career has been in pharmacy education and half in association management. I think I'm perfect for this position. And it was the first question that they asked, and that's fundamentally how I answered it. And then the rest is history, almost 20 years worth.
That's always such an interesting question, because I think we often reflect, right? Like, did we even expect that we were here? So definitely for that. But let's just take a moment though and talk about your future. So you've done a lot, but what's in your future? What do you want your legacy to be?
So I was at an inflection point while I was at Samford, where I recognized that it was probably time for a career change of some kind. My husband and I were living and working about 100 miles apart at that point in time, still relatively new in our marriage, pre-children. And we wanted to shorten that distance, and live in the same place. So I started to really muse about, what would my next direction be? And so I decided I really needed to name my goal. What was my real goal? What was my passion? Because I firmly believe that if you're working within your passion space, then you are more fulfilled and you feel energized every day by coming to work. And you mentioned in my introduction that geriatrics was my area of interest, was my area of research when I finished my PhD, because I recognized in studying people like Dr. Peter Lamy that medication use in that population was particularly high risk and vulnerable. Older people, the physiological changes, comorbidities, multiple medications. And I wish I could say we had fixed that in my 40 years, but we haven't. But what I recognized is, regardless of age cohort, getting medication use rational and optimized was really what I was most passionate about. And I think we'll probably come back to this, but I feel right now, today, notwithstanding a pandemic, notwithstanding all of the other issues that are swirling around, that we're closer as a profession to exercising our societal mission. And I'm not done. We're not there yet. I like to think we're at the last mile, but we know from tech implementation that the last mile is the hardest. And so it really requires. So one of the things that I really want to do, the pandemic has provided us in pharmacy associations an unprecedented opportunity to collaborate. If I had $1 for every time I heard somebody say, pharmacy is just too fragmented. We wish we were like nursing and medicine. Well, I know a lot about nursing and medicine now after having worked closely with them for a long time here in this position. They are much more fragmented than pharmacy is. But in the pandemic, 14 national associations have come together, and we work together at least every week on how are we going to make sure that the pharmacy profession has been positioned effectively to take advantage of the opportunities that this pandemic has unfortunately or fortunately presented. So that's one angle. But I also had begun wondering, what else? And obviously also within these last 6 months, we have become attuned to how many social justice issues there are that impact pharmacy, impact healthcare, but disproportionately impact communities of color. And I think there's a part of my future that's going to get very intentional about working in that space. I can't define how or where or when, but that is building in me. And the more reading I've been doing in the last 5-6 months just completely reinforces that.
That's great. And I think a big take home point with that too, in terms of looking at one's future and legacy, is really being intentional, right? You mentioned that too, is that when you're intentional about it and you can really kind of begin to draw out the steps to do that.
I want to make the point that it's also evolutionary. I think that there's a tendency in our society, especially, to think that you have to have the map drawn perfectly, like by the time you go to college or get out of college or whatever. And, with things today changing as fast and as furiously as they are, I think being agile is critical. Being attentive to the opportunities that you see, or that somebody else helps you see more often than not, and trusting your instinct, I think are all really critical. And I think the typical person, my sons are 24 and 26. They're all both on a career trajectory right now, but my guess is that they're going to have, changes, curves, right turns, left turns throughout their career, just as I have had subtly in mine. It's always been pharmacy, but I've done a number of different things in that space.
Well, that's a great point, kind of recognizing what we have control over and what we don't, but then also being able to quickly adapt to the needs, not only of your own needs, I guess, in your career, but also the needs of society around you. I think that kind of also shifts what that means. So you did actually touch a little bit on this in terms of tools we need moving forward. Are there anything other tools that come to mind when you think about, okay, what should I put in my toolkit, or how should I start thinking about the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, just yesterday morning, I was part of a CEO Zoom discussion group, and the presenter was a Wharton professor who's just released a book on our world in 2030, which is not a long planning horizon, but most people today are only planning, 2-3 years out at best because of a lot of uncertainty. He was talking about longevity and the fact that people are very likely going to maybe make some significant shifts in their career, in their 40s, 50s, even their 60s. And one of the tools that I would be remiss if I didn't emphasize is lifelong learning. And there's so many different ways to do that, more ways to do that now because of what we've done to education in the pandemic, and how much content there is available digitally for people to consume, in some cases, at their leisure. And so I think that that's critically important. And then I would say that the most important tool in my toolbox are the relationships that I have. Both personal relationships, which oftentimes now cross over into professional relationships. Nurture those and cherish them, because they will make probably the largest impact on your life and on your career.
Okay, so now we talked a little bit about the future. Let's come back to the present in terms of certain initiatives that you're working on. So what current initiatives are you working on that you're most excited about?
So I mentioned the collaboration in pharmacy around making sure that pharmacists are fully utilized in the response to this pandemic. And I hope that has communicated to the American public that pharmacists are in fact essential frontline workers, that they need to appreciate beyond what they typically appreciate, how they could help you live healthier, better lives. We currently have 2 public-facing media activities going. One addresses the pipeline and the fact that I think IT is eating our lunch in terms of the interest of young people rising to higher education, cyber and artificial intelligence and all of those exciting things that pharmacy needs to know actually more about than we probably do. And so that's pharmacy is right for me. And then the other one is Pharmacists for Healthier Lives. And we've partnered with 19 other state and national pharmacy associations to bring this campaign to life. Now in its 3rd year, believe it or not. We have muted some of our paid advertisements during the pandemic because there's just no bandwidth for people to absorb unnecessary information these days. But we're hitting immunizations and the importance of that, et cetera. I have really enjoyed my work in interprofessional learning. And we now have 21 organizations like AACP in the Interprofessional Education Collaborative, which AACP helped to co-found in 2010. And so that's just very enriching and very rewarding, in part because those people don't question any longer the role for the pharmacists in the patient's healthcare team. And I always say, pharmacists are champions of interprofessional learning and practice because they recognize that medication use is a team sport. And they simply want their other clinicians and our patients to understand the essential role of the pharmacist on that team. And then on the horizon, it's been recommended that in order to help accelerate changes, innovation in education and transformation of practice, that AACP create a center for academic innovation and practice transformation. Now, this would be a part of AACP, not a separately incorporated, but how do we intensify and bring together the various things that not only we do, but what our members do, what other national associations do, that are really aligning well to accelerate practice transformation. There's now almost 90 schools of pharmacy working together with the Community Pharmacy Enhanced Services Network in the academic CPESN Transformation Collaborative, which really demonstrates the fact that the schools of pharmacy are taking seriously their role and responsibility in practice transformation at the local and the state level. That's a very exciting, that whole portfolio is very exciting to me.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so that on a positive, let's now talk about some obstacles and challenges. What are some obstacles or challenges that keep you up at night that you constantly think about?
Two things. One is how traditional payment systems for the work that pharmacists are most recognized to do and is essential work, that medication supply chain, distribution, education management system, the support, the financial support for that is essentially gone. And that has had so many negative impacts on the profession of pharmacy. And not only does it keep me up at night, it makes me cry because, and you've heard it, people are discouraging young people from going to pharmacy because of it. And that's so unfortunate because there are amazing opportunities in our profession today, but they're going to get even more amazing tomorrow. There was just a fabulous article in Modern Healthcare that really captures where pharmacy is going and highlights some very significant. Troy Trigstead, who is one of the leaders in that CPESN and the editor-in-chief of Pharmacy Times, just highlighted some very real. Humana, I believe, is the third party, is the insurer, and they're going to be contracting with pharmacists specifically to try to get uncontrolled blood pressure under control. And they recognize that those pharmacists on Main Street, USA, are the critical components to getting that done. So I'm excited about the fact that we're beginning to get recognition beyond the walls of pharmacy. But I also am concerned about the psyche of some of the pharmacists in our country and the impact it's having on them, on their family, and on their patients and the profession. So it's bad alignment on the payment side, and then it's the well-being impact of that I think are among our largest challenges in the profession today, and ones that AACP takes very seriously, as do my colleagues across pharmacy nationally in our associations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, now given the pandemic, that's added an additional burden, I think, on the well-being of several others. And we talked a little bit about this before, me and you, but we can then touch on it too in terms of the impact the pandemic has had on the workforce, and specifically women workforce, kind of across the board, not just in pharmacy. And what are your thoughts on kind of the impact the pandemic has had? Has it only amplified these challenges? What are your thoughts there?
It absolutely has. We have about 35 people on our staff here at AACP. And I would say somewhere in the 6, 8, 10 of those 35 people are parents of school-aged children. And so I've seen it. Some of them are in kindergarten and some of them are in 9th grade. I don't think we have anybody, but that's the span of of elementary, middle school, and high school here, and we have people with college-age students as well. I can't imagine what it's taking and what it's taking out of people to try to juggle their work, because everyone here works full time, while they are also trying to manage or co-manage that component of their family life. Now, some people are fortunate, they have resources, they can hire tutors and people, and they've created pods of parents and communities to share the burden and the load. But then you have our pharmacist colleagues, who most of them are required to be in their workplace and are struggling. And as you mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, I think in more cases than we're probably aware of, they've had to make a decision. Maybe it's a part-time job commitment, or maybe they have to step out of the workplace completely, just simply because. And if you're a single parent, oh my God, how are they doing it? I think you're seeing a lot of people relocate if they are able, so that, especially from this marketplace here in the Washington, D.C., where a lot of young people come and then they meet their spouse and they begin to raise their family. But the rest of their extended family is not local. And if you don't have those kinds of resources to draw upon, grandparent support, et cetera, then it is so hard. I have raised my blessings more than once that my children are 24 and 26, both studying right now, both working full time and studying right now, both still living at home, I would have to say, which, has its pluses and minuses. But, I'm not tutoring them. I'm not standing over their shoulder to make sure that they're getting their work done and not playing video games when they're supposed to be in class. Yeah, it's hard. And I did mention that I'm a big avid NPR fan. And we just had Jen White move from Chicago to Washington, D.C. to run the program called 1A. And she did a feature on this. I think it was just last week. I was listening to it on replay, where there's some very good documentation across the country, if not the world, about the negative impact of the pandemic, and disproportionately on women.
Okay, let's go back to a positive note. So what new, we're fluctuating in the past, the present, from the obstacles to the opportunities. So what have you seen some new initiatives that have emerged as a result of the pandemic?
I don't know. Well, yes, I do know. Telehealth, telepharmacy, unequivocally. We know that lots of practices shut down their, and this was true in ambulatory care outside of a hospital. It was also true with a lot of hospital care. We had faculty, for instance, who were, embedded in hospitals, clinics, et cetera, and they were magically transported to do their medication optimization work, broadly defined, including, reviewing complex patients, providing recommendations to the team, following up with those patients longitudinally to make sure that they knew what they needed to do and that they were able to do it. And all of that went remote. It was accelerating a trend that was already happening. I think it's Kaiser Permanente 2 years ago reported that over 50% of their patient encounters were virtual. And so there's no question that the pandemic hastened that trend that was already in process, which takes us into the whole realm of our pharmacists keeping up in this area of digital health. And that's a vast, big box, but it's a passion of mine because I think we can do remarkable work if we take advantage of emerging technologies, existing and emerging technologies, and that it's a fantastic career trajectory for some pharmacists who have an instinct for that. There's a staff member at APHA, Risa Tonka, and she is a zealot about digital health and actually helped the California Pharmacists Association just earlier this month run their second Digital Health Expo. I think, tremendous opportunities on the horizon in that area.
Yeah, 100%. I'm definitely an advocate for having our voices being heard and contributing to the healthcare story and the impact that we can have in various settings, and definitely digital health and technology is one that I think there's so much opportunity. So I agree. Okay, now we're going to transfer to leadership and mentorship. So the questions pertaining to that. Do you believe that leadership in healthcare is different than other sectors?
Not really. Not really. I forget what the count is. It's tens of thousands of books on leadership. And there are just core principles that run through. You have to have vision, and know that there's something to achieve that you can, through articulating your vision to the people who are around you, whether those are your staff colleagues, whether those are your customers, whether those are your investors. You've got to be able to make the case that your vision is the right direction for people to go, and they want to join you and they want to follow you, because you can't be a leader if you don't have followers. Your ability to plan and resource strategically is sort of agnostic of discipline. Cultivating a network of supporting colleagues, up, down, sideways, backwards. So I mean, obviously the context of healthcare is somewhat unique in that people are entrusting you to help them achieve, maintain their health, and at different levels of acuity, including all the way to the end of life. That means, but you still have to lead and manage the enterprise in a way that provides sustainability. Because as my boss at APHA would often say, no money, Lucinda, no mission. And so that's an important part of it as well.
Great. Okay, so the next one is on what are we getting wrong about leadership? Like is there something that you continuously hear that you're just saying, no, that's not, it's not really the case, or what do you think about that?
So one of the books, and I'm reading about 6 right now, which is probably pretty dysfunctional. But one of the books that really caught my attention is called Humble Leadership. And then there's a subtitle that I can't, part of it is about trust and relationships. And the author, and it's just a small paperback book. The author makes the point, authors, their father and son, that we need to wake up and recognize that society has changed. Probably when I began my career and began studying leadership, we were still fairly much in the industrial age. And there was a style of hierarchical leadership that made sure the machines and the people that ran them were, on time and productive and increasingly efficient. And so the point of this book is that day is over, and that a leader, to be successful today, leads in the midst of their people, not from a hierarchical. And so some of the things that should have been important all along: listening, developing an environment of trust, taking appropriate risks by engaging the innovative thoughts that you have in the people around you, are more important today in this new humble leadership era than they probably have been in the past. And so I think that some of what we have gotten wrong is not recognizing that our leadership style needs to change with the times. And not everybody's comfortable there. And so, some people who have been successful in the older hierarchical model may find themselves less effective And I would love to think, since we're talking to women largely, that these are more natural talents and instincts to nurture in women leaders. Because I think in general, women are better at creating and sustaining relationships. And essentially, this is all about relationship-centered leadership.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think too, you had mentioned the element of trust, right? And how humility actually ties in a lot with trust and being able to listen and building that relationship. And no, I definitely agree. I feel like that's one of the biggest shifts in terms of looking at positions of power and how they act in terms of the traditional setting, exactly like you said, in terms of it just being your superior versus now, can I trust them? Are they humble? Are they going to inspire me?
Yeah.
Definitely different time.
And taking it to the pandemic period just for a second, for those of us who were able to completely pivot, we found out on March the 12th that the governor of Virginia had said we're going to go into remote shutdown mode on Monday, the 16th. Fortunately, our staff were all remote enabled, and many of our folks teleworked already 1 to, in some cases, 3 days a week. So we were able to make this shift in no time. And we said, we're going to do it for 2 weeks. And then we're going to reevaluate. Well, here we are, in month 7. And while the office is open and people in small numbers do elect to come in, not every day in most cases, and even for parts of days, the vast majority of our staff have not crossed the threshold of this office since March 13th. And so as their CEO leader, I have worried about their well-being. We tried the virtual happy hours and all of those things, to try to keep cohesiveness. But to be honest with you, what I've really come down to recognize that the most important relationship is the one between that employee and their supervisor, and have really stressed to the supervisors that, yes, you could dive right into talking about the work, but let's make sure that you're always checking in on well-being. And I think that that's very consistent with this model of humble leadership, that it's not all about the work, it's about the people, and it's about how they're doing. And do they have what they need to be successful, to balance the challenges that they're, and we've been very explicit. We recognize that those of you who are taking care of, whether it's elderly parents and children or some combination thereof, we know you're going to get your work done. We don't want you to be crazy about it, but do what you need to do in order to make sure that you are able to keep everything as well in balance as this weird year allows us to keep things in balance.
100%. And I feel like the question of how are you, to genuinely ask it, to genuinely be concerned and want to listen, is actually become a form of leadership, right? In terms of to truly spend the time. Whereas before you would have been like, how are you? How's it going? Kind of quickly, to really spend that time to ask. And that can help build this trusting relationship for sure. So the next question, so we're getting a bunch of questions too in the Q&A, which we'll start after we finish these questions. But the next question that I have for you are, what are some leadership lessons and advice that you can provide to current and future healthcare leaders, either men or women at different stages of their career?
Yeah, and I do think that there are absolutely stages of people's career. And so to younger people, I think my priority is, and younger people tend to be the doers, right? They tend to have projects, they tend to have tasks of things that they're working on, they're producing, whether it's a meeting or whether it's a new pharmacy service or policies and procedures. And that's great. But for them to be able to progress in their career, my advice is to start building your network and do it very intentionally. And in order to do that, Lucinda Maine is a huge proponent of state and national pharmacy associations. Because I've said, if I didn't listen to upperclassmen when I was in my P1 year at Auburn, and go to the APHA annual meeting, which was, the student one was SAFA at the time. And if they hadn't encouraged me to interview with the president-elect for a committee position, I would, don't know where I would be today. Everything in my life since that time has been influenced by that really simple decision. And then when you're putting yourself into those positions, don't hesitate to approach someone you've heard of. I mentioned Peter Lamy a little bit ago. Peter was at the University of Maryland, and he was the international guru on drug use in the elderly. I was at an APHA meeting in the middle of my graduate work, and I was getting ready to review the literature on drug use in the elderly. And it seemed overwhelming. And I went to a speaker was speaking at, and I gathered up the courage to approach him after his presentation and introduce myself. And I said, Dr. Lamy, I'm Lucinda Maine. I'm a graduate student at Minnesota. I'm going to do my dissertation on drug use in the elderly. I said, I'm about to start the review of the literature. Do you have any recommendations? And he looked at me and he said, Lucinda, you can't review the entire literature. It's impossible. It's too vast. He said, so what you need to do is you need to define your research question and build your literature search around that. Now that should have been a duh, but to hear it from the icon in the field that I was entering was life-changing. Going on into further parts of someone's career, I became aware several years ago, probably as I was getting into my early to mid 40s and was getting involved in management and leadership, that about that time, if you are recognized for your leadership skills, your organization is going to begin pulling you in that direction, or you're going to be offered an opportunity to change positions, maybe change to another employer, or even maybe strike out on your own as an entrepreneur. But the work changes at that point in time. You go from being a doer to being a planner and a manager and a motivator of people. And that's a very awkward period of somebody's life because there's a lot of fulfillment in that doing stuff. And there's some challenges, like human resources challenges and things like that, that plans don't always go well when you make that change. And so what do you need then? You need a really supportive environment. You probably need some additional education and training. And hopefully your employer is providing you those professional development opportunities, but you still need that network. You need it more than ever.
Okay, so the final question here before we go to the audience questions, because there are several. So here we would like to take this opportunity to support one another and recognize the positive influence we have on one another. Can you name a woman that has inspired you, and why did you choose this person?
Oh, yes. Several, but the one that I cherish the most is Gloria Niemeyer-Franke. I got to know Gloria because APHA, just as I was finishing school and finishing my term as National Student APHA President, Mary Munson Runge, who is in herself an inspiration, first woman president of APHA, she was concerned, there was a lot of concern about the rapid increase in the number of women entering the field of pharmacy. My class in 1976 was 50-50, and you know it's been between 2/3 and 70% pretty consistently ever since. And so now today, the majority of licensed pharmacists in the profession are women. Hallelujah. But so Gloria was on the staff of APHA, and she was the staff lead for the APHA Task Force on Women in Pharmacy. She herself was iconic. She graduated from Purdue in the 40s and just had she and her husband, Don Franke, had a brilliant career in hospital pharmacy, and then she in association work. And in fact, just earlier this morning on the treadmill, I was listening to a podcast that Melissa Muir-Corrigan, one of my mentees, who has been remarkably successful on her own right, not necessarily because of me. She has a podcast called Melissa RX Script, if you haven't found it. She's in her second season, and she was interviewing Meta Lou Henderson, who was again, a fabulous woman leader. And they reflected on Gloria this morning as I was walking on my treadmill, and reminded me of how amazing her career was, especially for a woman of that time. And she didn't let that time get in her way, and just knew what was right. Her true north was better pharmacy services in the hospital pharmacy setting. And so she was an inspiration to me, and I'm honored to have been gifted the award that was created in her name and her honor in 2018.
Awesome. So now we're going to just start off with the questions in the chat. So there was a question that stated, there's a comment with a question. So I agree with Dr. Maine's comments on pharmacists' role in technology. Working in health tech for nearly 20 years, I have definitely witnessed the need for more pharmacists in this space. What are Dr. Maine's thoughts on how students are being prepared for future careers in the health tech space?
Yeah, so our strategic planning committee met earlier this month, and technology was one of the topics that we spent some time discussing. And universally, I think it's fair to say that we are not doing enough in the PharmD curriculum right now in this area. And I think there's a part of that is because we don't have a lot of faculty with deep expertise in that area. And we're talking about health information technology, we're talking about wearable devices, we're talking about artificial intelligence, and how all of those things can converge to help improve care delivery. So the answer is we've got to do more than we are currently doing, not just for rising graduates, but also for the existing workforce. I think a part of that can be done by AACP potentially working with some of these digital entities. We have a proposal right now that Tabula Rasa Healthcare, where your next guest, Sandra Leal, the president-elect of the APHA, currently works. And they are a company that is rapidly advancing in the application of technology for medication safety. And they would like to work with some of the colleges of pharmacy in order to engage our learners in how this is really a forward-looking career opportunity for pharmacy students and graduates. So cultivating some of those opportunities, and maybe seeing if we can't encourage some internships so that students, if they have the summer to use, I did a lot of exploration of my career on my summers at Auburn, and worked in a different setting of pharmacy every summer in order to get a better understanding of where my passion best aligned with the opportunities in the profession. So we need to definitely do a lot more than we're doing now.
Wonderful. So definitely twofold with exposure and building the capacity of that topic within pharmacy schools. Okay, so the next question we have is, are there unique challenges that women might face finding their leadership voice or from leading from any seat? And are there any tools or lessons to help?
Wow, there's a lot in that question.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I want to stress, and this is one point that was made about Gloria in the podcast this morning, is that Gloria Franke never held an elected office, and yet she was one of the most powerful women leaders that our profession has been blessed to have. So if people say, well, I don't want to run for office, you don't have to. What we need in pharmacy and what we need writ large in society are both titled leaders and people who are willing to lead from where they are. We need change in practice, and change is not easy. But one of the worst mistakes I ever made, which I wish I could go back and reconstruct, my first job out of graduate school was created for me. And it was a joint position between the University of Minnesota, a faculty position, and what we would today call an AmCare pharmacist position. But mind you, this was 1984. There was no internet to search to see whether I could identify anyone else, no LinkedIn. And what I failed to do was I failed to ask the question somewhere, somehow, is anyone in pharmacy has somebody already created this model where they wanted me to come in and create a service where physicians who had complex older patients could refer those patients to me for optimization. And it was a concept that in that environment didn't exist. And so what I didn't realize that 4 hours by car down the road south to Iowa City, Iowa, Dennis Helling and Barry Carter had created that model in family practice clinics in Iowa. If I had just taken a field trip to go and learn from them, oh my God, I might still have been there. Now, fortunately, the seeds I planted while I was there in that environment actually flourished, and they have expanded that model markedly in that practice today. It's a 300 physician multi-specialty group practice, so it was a big platform to speak on. So ask for help. Who has done this, and how can I learn from them and emulate what they're doing? That's leadership in practice. Now, do women have it harder? I haven't, and I can't explain necessarily why. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by and inspired by other leaders. And so maybe that's one of those ingredients. I've seen other women leaders, but I've also learned from men. You know, my major league mentor in graduate school was a male. He was a pediatrician, and here I was studying geriatric drug use, but he helped to co-create my first position and has remained in a mentoring relationship with me longitudinally, at a distance, always. But I know I can call him when I have a question in my mind and I need some advice.
So actually the next question ties in a little bit with that, because it asks how to raise the woman voice when leadership is still dominated by men.
That is hard. I mean, it is not uncommon to hear this comparison that the same behaviors, when demonstrated by a male versus a woman, are interpreted, oh, he's being assertive, he's being strong, she's being difficult, whatever. And that's really unfortunate if that's the gestalt of the environment. Find a sponsor is one of the more recent suggestions that I have intercepted. You know, we talk about role models, we talk about mentors. I have role models. Some of them are positive role models, some of them are negative role models. I don't want to be like that. That's valuable. I have mentors and mentees. But this notion of a sponsor is someone who is well positioned in whatever the organization is that you are part of, who has come to recognize your unique gifts and talents, and is willing to stand up when an opportunity presents itself and say to the boys in the room, I think that Rola is perfect for this position right now. And I'll support her if we decide to give her this opportunity. And then I think the key to communicating is to first listen. And that was a hard lesson for me as I was maturing in my leadership, even here at AACP. Because as an extrovert and sort of as a visionary individual, man, I got the answer for this and I want to share it right now, which is not always the best thing to do. Best thing to do is to stop, listen to the conversation that's going on, and then at the right time, present a solution or a possibility. Now, I've also heard women say that they've done that. The conversation has gone on, and then a man says it, and that's the best idea we've ever heard. And I don't have a solution for how to address that when that happens, except maybe make the leader of that committee or that whatever group you're working with aware of the fact in a very polite and diplomatic way. You know that great idea that Joe had? If you'd been listening, you would have heard me say that 5 minutes earlier. You got to take a couple risks like that, I think, in order to shut that unfortunate practice down.
So I want to get to this question. We still have a bunch, but I just want to definitely make sure we get to this question before the end of the session. So this question is that we are in a new age of education. How will content development keep up with the demand for assuring consumers, medical professionals, scientists, physicians, and pharmacists are receiving accurate content?
That is a fabulous question, as all of these have been, but it is where we are right now. When I listen to somebody talk about clinical decision-making in artificial intelligence, usually they're willing to admit that right now you should not over-rely on artificial machine learning. It's going to get better. There's no question about it. But right now it's fragile. I often think about it from the perspective of the PharmD education. We are at a point where it is no longer feasible to stuff more and more facts and knowledge into the PharmD curriculum. Things, not only are new drugs and new drug categories and biologics and whatnot being brought to market at, I think, record speed. The complexity of it is just profound. New knowledge being delivered, identified at a rate that is more than exponential. So one of the things we believe is that, and I mentioned it in digital, there are some areas where there's insufficient faculty expertise. Some really smart people get sucked out of academia to go to, help build the next, invention. So I think there's a role to play. Why should faculty at 140 plus schools of pharmacy have to come up with the update on diabetes type 2 every single year? Shouldn't there be some collective ability for us to work across the academy so that the acquisition of updated, accurate knowledge resources is a combined effort, whereas the real value of the teacher is engaging the learner in putting that knowledge to best use, knowing how to find and stay abreast of the most important advances in a particular field, and practice strategies. And graduating a student as an early practitioner who's very comfortable with that process of knowledge acquisition, as close as your cell phone, curating that to make sure that you're getting it from the best and most accurate and reliable sources, but then knowing what to do with that information when you get it. The day of memorization and rote repetition are behind us. I think, even though I recognize it may not be completely behind us. There's foundational knowledge that's essential that we have to make sure that every graduate leaves with, but their ability to apply that and synthesize lots of information from various sources is really where we have to point ourselves in education and practice today.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not even just, I think, even thinking through not only the content that we're consuming, but the content we put out and being part of that information that we generate. And I love your point about making sure that that information is coming from all sorts of sources, like in terms of, it's not just within the academic world or the hubs of the academic bubble, but across the industry and across the sector to really learn from each other. And like you said, even mentioned before, someone else could be doing something that you could be learning from in terms of the content and applying that. Okay, so we just have a couple more minutes. One of them, and I think we can kind of use this, this question was more about advice that you give to our women, senior, and millennial leaders who are struggling with the pandemic, financial crisis, instability at work, and taking care of their family. And they're so stressed out, but they want to lead properly. I think that's also kind of an interesting question. What are your thoughts on leadership in the world that we live in now, and some final thoughts there?
And this may sound, I hope it doesn't come off as trite. You can't do it if you're not taking care of yourself. And people do that in a lot of different ways. Our current rising president, Stuart Haynes, and his wife, Sina, have created something called the Yoga Elixir Apothecary. They're very big into yoga, very big into mindfulness practices. And they try to explain that you don't have to spend hours a day doing that, but taking a few breaks in the midst of a harried part of your day. They talk about just simply deep breathing. But if we don't maintain our own sense of wellness and stability, we are not going to be able to help the people who are depending upon us. And so I know that probably somebody says, yeah, it's easy for her, but I'm married. I have two young adult children who drive me crazy most of the time, staff of 35. And I've got to purposely, especially this year, find those ways that I can right myself. But I think we're all weary. I think we're all really weary. And I think that we're wearier still because we haven't gotten this beast under control. And so we have to be kind to ourselves and to each other in order to make sure that we don't burn out.
I think that's a theme we've been having throughout the talk in terms of kindness and checking in on ourselves and others so that we can be the leader that we would like. So we're just about a minute away. Any other final thoughts before we close out?
I think we've touched on everything that's important. Be well, stay safe, be kind to yourself and to those who are depending upon you. God bless.
So on behalf of Salus Vitae Group and myself, I would like to thank Dr. Lucinda Maine for joining us today and for sharing her experiences and outlook. It was truly a thoughtful and engaging conversation. Be sure to join us for our next webinar, and it's actually next week with Dr. Sandra Lull, another exceptional pharmacy leader. So Dr. Maine had actually mentioned her in this webinar, so we're really looking forward to hearing from her next week. And then also you can check our website for any other programs or initiatives that you might be interested in. And then of course, if you have any additional questions for us or the guest, just send them our way and then we can forward them along. So thank you all for attending, and I hope you all found it as beneficial as we did. So thank you.